Shadows and sacrifice. The morning sun peeked through the cracked shutters of a small, worn-down house at the edge of a bustling city. The house, built decades ago, carried the weight of time in its creaking wooden floors, chipped paint, and a faint smell of dampness that lingered in the air. The heart of this home was Sarah, a single mother in her early 30s who had weathered more storms than many twice her age. Her strength was etched into her weary face, her tired yet resolute eyes, and the careful way she spoke to her children, Lucy, 9, and Ben, 6. Today, as every day, began with a challenge. Sarah stood in the kitchen, staring at a half-empty bag of rice and a can of beans, mentally calculating how she could stretch their meager groceries for the rest of the week. Her worn apron hung loosely over her slender frame, and her hands bore the calluses of long hours spent scrubbing, cleaning, and working odd jobs just to make ends meet. On the table beside her sat an envelope. Its pristine white contrasted sharply with the worn furniture. Inside was an invitation, one she'd read so many times the creases had started to wear thin. It was for her sister's wedding, a grand event that promised joy, celebration, and the warmth of family. For Sarah, it represented more than just a reunion. It was a rare opportunity to reconnect with the family she had drifted away from during years of struggle. But there was a problem: money. Sarah had none to spare. The train tickets to her sister Emily's wedding were far beyond her reach, and the very thought of asking for help made her chest tighten with shame. Yet, as she looked at her children, playing with their makeshift toys in the adjacent room, she felt a tug of resolve. They deserved moments of happiness, no matter how small. They deserved a chance to belong. "Lucy, Ben," Sarah called softly, her voice breaking the stillness of the house. The children looked up, their bright eyes filled with curiosity. "Yes, Mommy?" Lucy asked, her voice tinged with the innocence that only a child could carry in such dire circumstances. "Come here," Sarah said, gesturing for them to join her at the table. They hurried over, their excitement at being summoned palpable, though they had no idea what was coming. Sarah sat down, pulling them close. She held the invitation in her hand, staring at it for a moment before showing it to them. "This," she began, "is an invitation to Aunt Emily's wedding. It's a big event, and she wants us to be there." Lucy's eyes lit up with excitement. "A wedding? Like in the movies?" Sarah nodded, smiling despite herself. "Yes, like in the movies. But it's far away, and we need train tickets to get there." Ben tilted his head, his 6-year-old mind trying to grasp the complexity of the situation. "Can we get the tickets, Mommy?" Sarah's smile faltered, but she refused to let her children see her worry. "We'll see, sweetheart. Mommy will figure something out." Lucy wrapped her arms around Sarah's waist. "I hope we can go. I want to see Aunt Emily and wear a pretty dress." Ben chimed in. "I want to eat cake. Is there cake, Mommy?" Sarah laughed softly, stroking their hair. "Yes, sweetie, there will be cake. Lots of it." As the children returned to their games, Sarah's smile faded. The reality of their situation loomed heavy. Her wallet held a mere handful of crumpled bills, and even that had to be rationed carefully for food, utilities, and rent. The thought of spending it on train tickets felt like an impossible luxury. Yet the longing in her children's eyes ignited a determination in her heart. She glanced at the cracked clock on the wall. It was nearing noon, and she had a shift at the local diner. Though the pay was meager, every penny counted. Grabbing her worn-out coat and tying her hair back, Sarah kissed her children goodbye and stepped out into the chilly autumn air. The diner was a modest establishment on the edge of town, frequented by locals who knew her by name. The staff was small, and Sarah's responsibilities were many: taking orders, cleaning tables, and sometimes even helping in the kitchen. Today was no different, and she worked tirelessly, her hands moving mechanically while her mind raced with thoughts of how to scrape together enough for the tickets. During her break, Sarah sat in the back room, sipping on a cup of lukewarm coffee. Her co-worker, Maria, noticed her somber expression and sat down beside her. "Sarah, you've been quiet today," Maria said, her voice laced with concern. "Everything okay?" Sarah hesitated. Maria was a kind woman, always ready with a listening ear, but sharing her struggles felt like admitting defeat. Still, the weight of her worries pressed heavily on her chest. I need to find a way to buy train tickets," Sarah admitted quietly. "My sister's getting married, and I want to take the kids. It's just, I don't know how I'll afford it." Maria's brow furrowed. "That's tough. Have you thought about asking for help?" Sarah shook her head. "I can't, Maria. I don't want to burden anyone. People have their own problems." Maria placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Sometimes, Sarah, people are willing to help if you just ask. You'd be surprised. Maybe there's someone out there who'd understand." Sarah nodded, but the thought of reaching out still felt insurmountable. As her shift ended, and she walked home in the fading light of day, her mind was a whirlwind of possibilities and doubts. She couldn't bear the thought of disappointing her children, but the reality of their financial situation was unyielding. That night, after putting Lucy and Ben to bed, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table. The invitation lay before her, a symbol of the life she wished she could give her children. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, the silent tears falling freely as she whispered into the quiet house. "Please," she said to no one in particular. "If there's anyone out there, we need help." A leap of faith. Sarah woke early the next morning to the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows. The sky was a dull gray, mirroring the uncertainty in her heart. Despite the chill in the air, she pulled herself from bed and padded into the kitchen. The children were still asleep, curled up together beneath a single threadbare blanket. Their soft, even breathing filled her with a bittersweet sense of peace. They were her world, her reason to keep fighting, no matter how insurmountable the odds seemed. As she prepared their meager breakfast, a pot of watery oatmeal, her thoughts kept circling back to the conversation with Maria. The idea of asking for help felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. It terrified her, but it also stirred something else. Hope. What if just once, someone was willing to extend a hand? By the time Lucy and Ben shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from their eyes, Sarah had made up her mind. Today, she would take a step she had never taken before. She would ask for help, not for herself, but for her children and the life they deserved. "Good morning, my loves," she greeted them, forcing cheer into her voice as she placed their bowls on the table. "Morning, Mommy," Lucy replied, her voice still groggy but tinged with a smile. Ben yawned as he climbed onto his chair. "What are we doing today?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Mommy's going to work on something very important. But first, we'll eat breakfast and make today a good one." "Okay." The children nodded, and Sarah felt a flicker of warmth. Their resilience gave her strength, even on the hardest days. After breakfast, Sarah tidied the house while the children played in their small corner. Then she sat down in front of her battered laptop, a hand-me-down from a neighbor years ago. Its screen flickered as it booted up, and Sarah found herself staring at the blank email page, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had no idea where to start. How could she condense years of struggle into a single message? How could she capture the weight of her hope, her love for her children, and her desperate desire to attend her sister's wedding? The words refused to come, and she felt a lump forming in her throat. Lucy wandered over, her small hand tugging at Sarah's sleeve. "Mommy, what are you doing?" Sarah looked down, her daughter's curious eyes filled with an innocence she wanted so desperately to protect. "I'm writing a letter, sweetheart." "Who to?" Sarah hesitated. "To someone who might help us. We'll see." Lucy beamed. "That's good, Mommy. You always tell us to ask for help if we need it, right?" Sarah's breath caught. Out of the mouths of babes, she thought. "You're absolutely right, Lucy. Mommy needs to listen to her own advice." With that, she began to type. The words came slowly at first, hesitant and uncertain, but as she continued, They began to flow. She poured her heart onto the screen, explaining her family's situation, her sister's wedding, and the hope she had of making it there for the sake of her children. Her voice, though vulnerable, was clear and honest. She ended the email with a simple plea. If anyone out there can help, even in the smallest way, you would be giving my family a gift we could never repay. Her finger hovered over the send button for what felt like an eternity. Then, with a deep breath, she clicked it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores and moments with the kids, but her mind kept drifting back to the email. Had anyone seen it? Would anyone care? The doubt gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the laughter of Lucy and Ben as they played with their makeshift toys. It wasn't until late that evening, as Sarah was folding laundry, that her phone buzzed with a notification. Her heart leaped as she saw the email icon glowing on the screen. She quickly opened the message, her hands trembling. The subject line read, "A helping hand." The message itself was short but kind. "Dear Sarah, I read your story, and I want to help. Your family deserves to be there for such a special day. Please let me know how I can assist with the tickets. I'll cover the cost. No strings attached." Sarah stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process the words. Was this real? Could a stranger truly be this generous? She read the message again and again, her chest tightening with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "Mommy." Lucy's voice broke through her thoughts. She stood in the doorway, clutching her worn stuffed bunny. "Why are you crying?" Sarah hadn't realized tears were streaming down her face. She knelt down, pulling Lucy into a tight embrace. "Mommy's not sad, sweetheart. These are happy tears." The next morning, Sarah responded to the email, her words filled with heartfelt thanks. The stranger replied promptly, confirming that they would send the money for the tickets directly to the train station for her to pick up. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. She decided to take the children out that day, wanting to give them a glimpse of joy after so many difficult months. They visited the park, where Lucy and Ben ran barefoot through the grass, their laughter filling the crisp autumn air. Sarah watched them from a bench, a soft smile on her lips. For a moment, the world felt brighter, as if the kindness of a stranger had painted it in warmer hues. That evening, as they walked home, Lucy grabbed Sarah's hand. "Mommy, are we really going to Aunt Emily's wedding?" Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, her heart swelling with love. "Yes, sweetheart, we're really going." The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah picked up the tickets from the station, holding them in her hands as if they were the most precious treasure. She worked extra shifts to save for small things, a second-hand dress for Lucy, a pair of sturdy shoes for Ben, and a simple blouse for herself. Each purchase felt like a victory, a step closer to giving her children the experience they deserved. But even as she focused on the practicalities, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the stranger who had made it all possible. She knew nothing about them, not even their name, but their generosity had changed everything. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there were still good people in the world. On the eve of their journey, Sarah tucked her children into bed and sat down at the kitchen table. She pulled out a notebook and began to write a letter to the stranger, pouring her gratitude onto the page. She promised to pay their kindness forward, to be a light for someone else in need. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. She didn't have an address to send it to, but she hoped that, somehow, the universe would carry her thanks to the one who had shown her family such compassion. As she climbed into bed that night, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Tomorrow, they would board the train, leaving behind the weight of their struggles, if only for a little while. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of something she had long forgotten. Hope. The journey begins. The dawn of their departure was cloaked in a golden sunrise, its warm light filtering through the cracked windows of Sarah's modest home. For once, the sight didn't bring thoughts of despair or longing. Instead, it illuminated the hopeful faces of Lucy and Ben as they eagerly stuffed their belongings into small, mismatched bags. The excitement in the air was palpable, even in their cramped living space. "Do you think Aunt Emily will like my dress?" Lucy asked, holding up the second-hand dress Sarah had found at the thrift store. It was simple but elegant, with soft floral patterns that matched Lucy's wide-eyed innocence. "She'll love it," Sarah assured her, smoothing the fabric over her daughter's tiny frame. "You'll be the most beautiful little girl there." Ben was less interested in his outfit, a pair of neatly patched trousers and a clean shirt, and more excited about the train itself. "Is it like the one we saw in the picture book, Mommy? The one that goes really fast?" Sarah chuckled, ruffling his hair. "Not quite as fast, but it's still a train, and it'll take us somewhere magical." Ben's eyes widened with wonder. "Like a story." "Exactly like a story," Sarah replied, feeling a swell of emotion. She hoped this journey would be the start of a better chapter for all of them. The train station. The walk to the station was a bittersweet one. Their neighborhood, with its cracked sidewalks and faded storefronts, had been home for so long. Yet, as Sarah looked around, she realized how much she longed for change, for brighter days and opportunities that didn't feel so far out of reach. At the station, the bustling crowds and rhythmic clatter of trains created an atmosphere of anticipation. Lucy and Ben clung to Sarah's hands, their eyes darting around in awe. "Look, Mommy, that train is so big," Lucy exclaimed, pointing to a sleek silver locomotive pulling into the platform. Sarah smiled, her heart lifting at her children's joy. She handed their tickets to the conductor, who gave her a kind smile before waving them aboard. The train was older, with worn seats and faded curtains, but to Lucy and Ben, it was a wonderland. As they settled into their seats, Sarah gazed out the window, watching the city slowly fade into the distance. Her heart was a mix of emotions, relief, excitement, and a lingering fear of the unknown. But as the train picked up speed, she let herself exhale. They were finally on their way. The journey unfolds. The train ride was long but filled with moments of discovery. Lucy and Ben were enthralled by the changing scenery. The fields of green that seemed to stretch endlessly, the distant mountains, and the occasional glimpse of a river glinting in the sunlight. "Look, Mommy, cows," Ben exclaimed, pressing his face against the window. Lucy giggled. "Do you think they're going to the wedding too?" Sarah laughed softly, enjoying the lightheartedness of her children. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax. She even struck up a conversation with an older woman sitting across the aisle, who introduced herself as Mrs. Hargrove. "Heading to a special occasion?" Mrs. Hargrove asked, her kind eyes twinkling. "My sister's wedding," Sarah replied, glancing at Lucy and Ben. "It's been years since I've seen her. This trip means everything to us." Mrs. Hargrove nodded, her expression softening. "Family is everything, my dear, and you're giving your children something they'll remember forever." Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she smiled in thanks. The stranger's words reminded her of the kindness she had received to make this journey possible. She resolved to carry that kindness forward, no matter what challenges lay ahead. A night on the train. As night fell, the train's rhythmic motion lulled Lucy and Ben into a peaceful sleep. They huddled together under a blanket Sarah had brought, their small faces illuminated by the soft glow of the overhead lights. Sarah sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the darkened landscape outside. The occasional flicker of a distant town reminded her of the life they were leaving behind, if only temporarily. She couldn't help but wonder what awaited them at the end of this journey. Her thoughts were interrupted by a tap on her shoulder. Mrs. Hargrove leaned over, offering a small thermos and a package wrapped in wax paper. "Take this," the older woman said. "It's just some tea and biscuits, but you look like you could use it." Sarah hesitated, her pride clashing with her gratitude. "Oh, I couldn't." "Nonsense," Mrs. Hargrove interrupted gently. "Sometimes a little kindness goes a long way." Tears prickled Sarah's eyes as she accepted the offering. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much this means." Mrs. Hargrove patted her hand. "Kindness, my dear, has a way of coming back around." Sarah sipped the tea, its warmth spreading through her chest. In that moment, she felt a renewed sense of hope. This journey wasn't just about attending a wedding. It was about rebuilding her faith in humanity and herself. An unexpected stop. The train screeched to a halt in the middle of the night, jerking Sarah awake. Lucy and Ben stirred but remained asleep as she peered out the window. The conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. "Apologies, folks. We've encountered a minor delay. We'll be stopped here for about an hour." Groaning murmurs spread through the train car, but Sarah remained calm. She turned her attention to the dimly lit platform outside, where a few travelers milled about, stretching their legs. Deciding it was a good opportunity to clear her mind, she carefully slipped out of her seat and stepped onto the platform. The cool night air was refreshing, and Sarah took a deep breath. As she wandered a short distance, she noticed a man sitting on a bench, his head bowed as he scribbled in a notebook. He looked up as she approached, offering a faint smile. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice warm but weary. "Not really," Sarah admitted. "Too much on my mind, I guess." The man nodded knowingly. "Traveling with little ones, I see. Must be a lot to handle." Sarah smiled. "It is, but they're good kids. This trip is for them, mostly." He raised an eyebrow. "Special occasion." "My sister's wedding," Sarah explained. "It's been years since we've seen her. This trip, it's more than just a journey. It's a chance to reconnect." The man's expression softened. "Family is worth it," he said. "And sometimes, the hardest journeys lead to the best destinations." As the conductor called for passengers to reboard, Sarah thanked the stranger and returned to her seat. His words stayed with her, a quiet reminder that even in the midst of uncertainty, there was always the promise of something better. The final stretch. The train resumed its journey, and as dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the approaching cityscape. Sarah gently woke Lucy and Ben, who rubbed their eyes and looked out the window in awe. "Are we there yet?" Ben asked, his voice filled with anticipation. "Almost," Sarah replied, her own excitement growing. She felt a surge of gratitude for the stranger who had made this possible, for Mrs. Hargrove's small acts of kindness, and for the resilience that had carried her this far. As the train pulled into the station, Sarah gathered their bags and took a deep breath. This was it, the beginning of a new chapter for her family. She reached for Lucy and Ben's hands, holding them tightly as they stepped onto the platform. The station was bustling with life, its grand arches and polished floors a stark contrast to the simplicity of their home. Sarah scanned the crowd, her heart pounding. And then she saw her, Emily, her sister, standing near the entrance with tears streaming down her face. "Sarah," Emily called, running toward them. Sarah barely had time to react before Emily enveloped her in a tight embrace. The years of distance melted away in an instant, replaced by the warmth of family. "You made it," Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We made it," Sarah replied, glancing down at Lucy and Ben, who were already hugging their aunt. "And it's all because of a little kindness." As they left the station together, Sarah felt a sense of renewal. This journey had been more than a trip. It had been a testament to resilience, love, and the power of human connection. A reunion of hearts. The car ride to Emily's home was filled with laughter, stories, and more questions from Lucy and Ben than Sarah could possibly answer. Emily drove, glancing at Sarah in the rearview mirror every few moments, as if reassuring herself that her sister was truly there. The warmth in her smile was something Sarah hadn't seen in years. Years stolen by the struggles of distance, financial hardship, and the demands of life. "I still can't believe you're here," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was so worried you wouldn't make it." Sarah glanced at her children, who were gazing out the car windows at the bustling cityscape. "It wasn't easy," she admitted, her voice low. "But we're here, and that's what matters." Emily reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand briefly before returning it to the wheel. "You've always been the strongest person I know, but you don't always have to do it alone, you know." Sarah nodded, the words striking a chord deep within her. She hadn't realized how much she'd been carrying until now, surrounded by family and the possibility of joy. Emily's home. A warm welcome. When they arrived at Emily's house, the children gasped in awe. The home was modest but vibrant, painted in cheerful colors, and adorned with flower boxes bursting with blooms. A small garden in the front yard was dotted with fairy lights that twinkled even in the daylight. "Whoa," Ben whispered, his eyes wide. "This is like a castle." Emily laughed as she opened the door. "Welcome to my little kingdom. Come on in." Inside, the house was just as inviting. The living room was cozy, with plush furniture and shelves filled with books and photographs. The smell of fresh-baked cookies wafted through the air, and Lucy immediately gravitated toward the kitchen, where Emily's fiancé, Michael, was pulling a tray out of the oven. "Are you a chef?" Lucy asked, her eyes lighting up. Michael chuckled. "Not quite, but I make a mean cookie. Want to try one?" Lucy nodded enthusiastically, and soon both children were munching on cookies, their giggles filling the room. Sarah watched them with a bittersweet smile, the sight of her children experiencing such simple joy filling her heart. Emily appeared at her side, handing her a steaming cup of tea. "They're beautiful, Sarah. You've done an amazing job." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away. "I've tried. It hasn't been easy." Emily placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to explain. You're here now, and that's enough." Wedding preparations. A shared bond. The days leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah quickly found herself swept into the preparations, helping Emily finalize details for the ceremony and reception. It was exhausting but exhilarating, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was part of something bigger than her own struggles. One afternoon, as the two sisters worked on arranging flowers, Emily paused, her hands stilling over a bouquet. "Do you remember when we were kids, and Mom would make us pick wildflowers for the table?" Emily asked, her voice soft with nostalgia. Sarah smiled. "You mean when you'd pick all the pretty ones and leave me with the weeds?" Emily laughed, nudging her playfully. "You always made them look beautiful anyway. You've always had a way of making the best out of what you're given." The comment struck Sarah deeply, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. Instead, she reached over and squeezed Emily's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it conveyed everything words couldn't. A new dress for Sarah. The night before the wedding, Emily pulled Sarah aside with a mischievous grin. "I have a surprise for you." Sarah frowned, confused, as Emily led her to a spare bedroom. Inside, hanging on the closet door, was a dress, a stunning navy blue gown that shimmered softly in the light. "Emily," Sarah whispered, her voice catching. "What is this?" "It's yours," Emily said simply. "I know you didn't have the means to get something fancy, and I wanted you to feel as beautiful as you are tomorrow." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "You didn't have to do this. I would have been fine in what I brought." Emily shook her head. "You deserve this, Sarah. You've sacrificed so much for everyone else. Let me do this for you." Overwhelmed, Sarah embraced her sister tightly. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel special, to accept kindness without questioning it. The wedding day. A moment of magic. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the sky a brilliant canvas of blue. The venue, a picturesque garden filled with blooming flowers and fairy lights, felt like something out of a dream. Guests mingled, their laughter and chatter creating a vibrant backdrop to the day's festivities. Sarah watched from the sidelines as Lucy and Ben, dressed in their finest, explored the garden with wide-eyed wonder. Lucy spun in her dress, her laughter echoing through the air, while Ben carefully examined the decorations, his curiosity endless. As the ceremony began, Sarah took her seat near the front, her heart swelling with emotion. Emily walked down the aisle, radiant in her wedding gown, her eyes locked on Michael, who waited at the altar with a look of pure love. It was a moment of perfection, a culmination of joy, hope, and the promise of a future filled with happiness. Sarah couldn't help but cry as the vows were exchanged. They were simple yet profound, a reminder of the power of love and connection. She glanced at her children, who were watching intently, their faces lit with awe. This was a memory they would carry with them forever. A dance under the stars. As the sun set and the reception began, the garden transformed into a magical scene of twinkling lights and lively music. Guests danced, laughed, and celebrated under the stars, their joy infectious. Emily pulled Sarah onto the dance floor, laughing as her sister protested. "Come on, Sarah. You deserve to have fun." Reluctantly, Sarah let herself be swept into the moment. She twirled and swayed, her laughter mixing with the music. For the first time in years, she felt free. Free from worry, free from fear, and free to simply be. Lucy and Ben joined her, their giggles lighting up the night as they danced alongside her. It was a moment Sarah wished she could bottle up and keep forever, a reminder of what life could be when it was filled with love and joy. A quiet conversation. Later that evening, as the festivities began to wind down, Sarah found herself sitting with Emily beneath a tree adorned with fairy lights. The children were fast asleep on a nearby blanket, worn out from the excitement of the day. "You've made this so beautiful," Sarah said, her voice soft. "I don't think I've ever seen you so happy." Emily smiled, her eyes glistening. "It's because you're here, Sarah. This wouldn't have been complete without you." Sarah looked away, her throat tightening. "I wasn't sure we'd make it. It felt impossible at times." "But you did," Emily said firmly. "And that's what matters. You're stronger than you realize, Sarah. Don't ever forget that." The two sisters sat in silence for a while, the weight of their shared history settling between them. It wasn't heavy or burdensome. It was a bond, unspoken but unbreakable. The promise of tomorrow. As the night drew to a close, Sarah carried her sleeping children to the guest room, tucking them in gently. She watched them for a moment, her heart full. This trip had been more than just a journey to a wedding. It had been a journey back to herself, to the strength and love she had always carried, but sometimes forgotten. Before she left the room, Sarah whispered softly, "We're going to be okay. All of us." And for the first time in years, she truly believed it. Seeds of change. The morning after the wedding dawned with a serene calm. The house was quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves outside the windows and the faint chirping of birds greeting the day. Sarah lay awake in the guest room, listening to the gentle breathing of her children, who were still deep in slumber. For the first time in years, her heart felt lighter. But alongside the lightness was a nagging thought. What comes next? The wedding had been a moment of magic, a brief reprieve from the weight of her daily struggles. But the realities of her life back home loomed large. The bills, the worn-out shoes, the empty pantry, they would all be waiting for her. Yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. The kindness she had received, the joy she had witnessed, and the love she felt from her family had planted seeds of change in her heart. The farewell morning. Emily insisted on making a hearty breakfast before Sarah and the children began their journey back home. The kitchen was filled with the smell of pancakes, sizzling bacon, and freshly brewed coffee. Lucy and Ben sat at the table, their faces alight with joy as they recounted every detail of the wedding to their aunt. "Aunt Emily, did you see me dancing?" Ben asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "I was spinning so fast." Emily laughed, tussling his hair. "You were the star of the dance floor, little man. And the cake was the best ever." Lucy chimed in, her hands gesturing dramatically. "I want to learn how to make it." Sarah sat quietly, sipping her coffee and taking it all in. The warmth of the moment wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. When the meal was over, Emily pulled Sarah aside. "I have something for you," Emily said, handing her a small envelope. Sarah frowned. "Emily, you've already done so much." "Please," Emily interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "This isn't charity. It's family. Open it." Inside the envelope was a modest amount of cash, enough to cover a month's worth of groceries or help with the overdue rent. Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll take it," Emily said with a smile. "And say you'll use it to make things a little easier, even if just for a while." Sarah nodded, her throat too tight with emotion to speak. She pulled her sister into a tight embrace, silently vowing to make the most of this unexpected gift. The train ride home. The train ride back was quieter than the journey there. Lucy and Ben were worn out from the excitement of the past few days, their heads resting against each other as they dozed in their seats. Sarah gazed out the window, her mind swirling with thoughts. She thought about the stranger who had paid for their tickets, the woman on the train who had shared tea and biscuits, and Emily's unwavering support. Each act of kindness had been a lifeline, pulling her out of the depths of despair and reminding her that she didn't have to face everything alone. As the countryside blurred by, Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out the notebook she had brought along. Flipping to a blank page, she began to write. It wasn't a letter or a list of worries, it was a plan. She listed small, actionable steps she could take to improve her family's situation. Finding additional work, budgeting more carefully, reaching out for resources in the community. But at the top of the page, she wrote a single word: hope, a fresh perspective. When they arrived home, the sight of their small, worn house no longer filled Sarah with the same sense of dread it once had. Instead, she saw it as a starting point, a place from which she could begin to rebuild. Lucy and Ben ran inside, their laughter echoing through the halls as they recounted their adventures to their stuffed animals. Sarah lingered on the porch for a moment, taking in the quiet of the neighborhood. The air felt different, lighter somehow. As she stepped inside, she noticed the little things she hadn't before: the leaky faucet in the kitchen, the peeling wallpaper in the living room, the sagging couch cushions. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt determined. These were problems she could solve, one at a time, taking the first step. The next morning, Sarah sat at her old laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had drafted an email to the manager of a nearby grocery store, inquiring about part-time work. The email was polite and professional, but as she prepared to send it, doubt crept in. What if they didn't respond? What if she wasn't good enough? Then she remembered the words Emily had said to her the day before: "You're stronger than you realize." With a deep breath, Sarah hit send. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. A helping hand. Later that week, Sarah received a reply from the grocery store manager. They were impressed by her initiative and invited her for an interview. The news sent a ripple of excitement through the household. Lucy and Ben cheered as Sarah read the email aloud. "You're going to do great, Mommy," Lucy said, her eyes shining. "I'll tell them you're the best worker ever," Ben added, puffing out his chest. Sarah laughed, pulling them both into a hug. "Thank you, my loves. You're my biggest cheerleaders." The interview was nerve-wracking, but Sarah walked in with her head held high. She spoke honestly about her experiences, her dedication, and her willingness to work hard. The manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Carter, listened attentively. "I admire your determination," Mrs. Carter said at the end of the interview. "We could use someone like you on our team. Can you start next week?" Sarah's heart leaped. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much." Small victories. The job at the grocery store was just the beginning. With a steady income, Sarah was able to pay off a few overdue bills and stock the pantry with enough food to last the month. The children noticed the difference too. Lucy beamed when Sarah packed her a fresh apple for lunch, and Ben proudly showed off his new, second-hand sneakers to his classmates. The small victories added up, each one a step closer to stability. But Sarah didn't stop there. She began volunteering at a local community center, helping organize events and resources for families in need. It was her way of giving back, of paying forward the kindness she had received. A community connection. One evening, as Sarah was tidying up after a community center event, she struck up a conversation with one of the organizers, a woman named Clara. "You have a real gift for connecting with people," Clara said, watching Sarah comfort a crying child. "Have you ever thought about working in social services?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "Me? I don't think I'm qualified." Clara smiled. "You'd be surprised. Sometimes lived experience is the best qualification. Think about it." The idea lingered in Sarah's mind long after she returned home. Could she turn her struggles into something meaningful? Could she help others the way she had been helped? Dreams reignited. Over the next few months, Sarah began researching programs and scholarships for adults returning to school. She discovered a local program offering training for social work assistants. It wasn't an easy decision. Balancing work, parenting, and studying would be a monumental challenge. But the thought of building a future for her children, one filled with purpose and stability, gave her the courage to take the leap. A new chapter. The day Sarah received her acceptance letter into the program, she cried. Lucy and Ben hugged her tightly, their excitement matching her own. "You're going to be amazing, Mommy," Lucy said, her voice filled with conviction. Sarah looked at her children, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "I'm doing this for us," she said, "for all of us." As she hummed the letter on the refrigerator, Sarah felt a sense of pride she hadn't known in years. The journey wasn't over. There would still be struggles, still be challenges. But for the first time, she felt like she was steering the ship, guiding her family toward brighter days. And it all began with a train ticket, a leap of faith, and the kindness of strangers. Full circle. Months had passed since Sarah's return from her sister's wedding, but the memories of that transformative journey still felt fresh. Each day, she carried the lessons and hope it had instilled in her. Life had not magically become easy. There were still long days, bills to pay, and moments of exhaustion. But Sarah no longer felt as though she was navigating the world alone. Her enrollment in the social work assistant program had opened doors she never thought possible. Balancing her studies with work and motherhood was grueling, but with each completed assignment, each class attended, and each supportive word from her children, Sarah felt herself growing stronger, more capable. A milestone reached. One crisp spring morning, Sarah stood outside the community college, clutching a folder filled with her final grades. The sun filtered through the budding trees, casting dappled light across the campus courtyard. Her heart raced as she flipped through the papers. There it was, in bold black letters, "Program completed with distinction." Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at the words. She had done it. Every late night spent studying, every moment of doubt, every sacrifice, it had all led to this. Sarah couldn't wait to share the news with Lucy and Ben. She rushed home, the folder clutched tightly in her hands. When she opened the door, the children were waiting for her, their faces lit with anticipation. "Did you do it, Mommy?" Lucy asked, her voice bubbling with excitement. Sarah nodded, holding up the folder. "I did it." The room erupted into cheers as Lucy and Ben leaped into her arms, their laughter ringing out like music. Sarah held them close, whispering, "This is for us, for our future." Paying it forward. With her certification in hand, Sarah began working at the very community center where she had once volunteered. Her role as a social work assistant allowed her to help families facing the same struggles she had endured. She became a beacon of hope for others, guiding them toward resources, offering a listening ear, and showing them that even the darkest days could give way to light. One day, a young woman named Carla walked into the center, clutching a crying baby and looking overwhelmed. Sarah recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same mix of fear and exhaustion she had once carried. "Hi, I'm Sarah," she said, approaching Carla with a warm smile. "How can I help you today?" Carla hesitated, her grip tightening on her child. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted, her voice trembling. I feel so lost." Sarah guided her to a quiet corner and sat with her, listening as Carla poured out her story. As she spoke, Sarah felt a deep sense of purpose. She shared her own experiences, offering not just advice but understanding. By the end of their conversation, Carla's shoulders had relaxed, and a faint smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she said softly. "You don't know how much this means." Sarah reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "I do," she replied. "And you're not alone." A reunion with kindness. Months later, as Sarah was organizing an event at the center, she received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, is this Sarah?" A familiar voice asked. "Yes, this is Sarah. Who's calling?" "This is David," the voice continued. "I'm the one who, well, I helped with your train tickets a while back." Sarah's breath caught. She had often thought about the stranger who had changed her life with their generosity, but she had never expected to hear from them again. "David," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know what to say. You changed everything for us." "I'm glad to hear that," David said, his tone humble. "I didn't expect anything in return, but I wanted to check in. I found your contact information through the community center's website. It looks like you've been doing amazing work." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "It's because of you. Your kindness gave me the chance to start over, and now I'm trying to do the same for others." They spoke for a while longer, sharing stories and updates. Before the call ended, David said something that stayed with Sarah. "Sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness to change someone's life," he said, "and now you're passing it on. That's the real reward." A family celebration. To celebrate Sarah's achievements, Emily invited her and the children back for another visit. This time, the journey felt different. There was no fear, no desperation, only anticipation and joy. Lucy and Ben were thrilled to see their aunt again, and Sarah couldn't wait to share her progress with her sister. The reunion was filled with laughter, hugs, and stories. Emily beamed with pride as Sarah recounted her journey, and the children ran through the garden, their laughter echoing in the warm evening air. That night, as the family sat around the dinner table, Emily raised her glass in a toast. "To Sarah," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "for showing us all what strength and perseverance look like, and for proving that even the toughest journeys can lead to beautiful destinations." Sarah blushed, but her heart swelled with gratitude. She looked around the table at the faces of her family, the people who had supported her, believed in her, and reminded her of the power of love and connection. A legacy of hope. Back home, life continued, but it no longer felt like a struggle to survive. Sarah's work at the community center grew, and she became known for her compassion and determination. Families sought her out, inspired by her story and her unwavering belief in the power of hope. Lucy and Ben thrived as well. Lucy took up an interest in art, her drawings filling the walls of their home with color and creativity. Ben excelled in school, his boundless curiosity leading him to dream of becoming an engineer. One evening, as Sarah tucked them into bed, Lucy looked up at her and said, "Mommy, I want to be like you when I grow up." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she kissed her daughter's forehead. "And I want you to be the best version of yourself. Sweetheart, you can do anything you set your mind to." The ripple effect. Years later, Sarah stood on a stage at a local event, addressing a room full of people. She had been invited to speak about her journey, how she had overcome adversity, found hope, and built a better future for her family. As she spoke, she noticed familiar faces in the crowd. Emily, beaming with pride. Mrs. Hargrove, the woman from the train who had shared her tea and biscuits. Clara, her mentor at the community center. And even David, the kind stranger who had set it all in motion. "This journey hasn't been easy," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But it taught me that we are never truly alone. Kindness, love, and hope, They are what carry us through. And no matter how small an act of kindness may seem, it can create ripples that change lives. The audience rose to their feet, applauding as Sarah stepped back from the podium. In that moment, she felt the fullness of her journey, the struggles, the triumphs, and the profound connections that had brought her to this point. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the best was yet to come.